Welcome back as we continue to talk about the Heidelberg Catechism. Actually, we're winding down our discussions about the Heidelberg Catechism that started last July. Specifically, we're talking about the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are really covered in Lord's Days 34 to 44. I'm not going to go specifically by Lord's Day here on out. I'm going to have a couple weeks where I talk about the Ten Commandments. I'll have a couple weeks where I talk about prayer, which will wind down the Heidelberg Catechism discussions, and then I'll have a session or two where I draw some conclusions about the Heidelberg Catechism itself. We'll take a look at the Ten Commandments. I actually posted them in last week's post, but you can also find them in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. As you read those Ten Commandments, which one do you think is most important? Actually, let's stop for a moment. Let's say there's 613 laws in the Old Testament. That's what they consider to be. 613 laws in the Old Testament. If you could find them all, and if you could read them all, which one do you think is most important? I'm sure you've heard of the story from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the three synoptic gospels, where somebody tries to trick Jesus, and they ask him, which is the most important commandment? He responds to love God and to love neighbor. And if you love God and love neighbor, you will fulfill the commandments, the laws from the Old Testament, all 613 of them. What's interesting is if you look at the Ten Commandments, the first four are about our vertical relationship with God. The remaining six are about our horizontal relationship with others. It looks like a cross, doesn't it? We love God by putting him first, worshiping God and only God, setting aside time to put him first in our lives and in our thoughts through worship, and by not using his name in vain. That really summarizes the first four of the Ten Commandments. There's a story about a family in Moline, Illinois. Dave was one of those beloved family members, but he took a job in Chicago and he was going to have to move. The family used to have many family gatherings, and Dave must have been the life of the party, so to speak, because they decided that the gatherings just weren't the same without good old Dave. But his mom had an idea. They had a picture of Dave, and so they enlarged it and created a big cardboard image of Dave that was even the right height, 5 feet, 8 inches tall. It was heavy cardboard, so whenever they'd have family gatherings, they would bring good old Dave out and he'd be with them. The cardboard image was known as Flat Dave. Word spread throughout the whole community. Everyone thought this was hilarious, and so people would come to the gatherings just to have their picture with Flat Dave. Some even thought that Flat Dave was better looking than the real Dave, who, by the way, became known as Thick Dave. But Dave found out that his family had started confusing him, the real Thick Dave, with the flat one. One day, the real Dave was talking to his mom on the phone when all of a sudden his mom ended the conversation abruptly and said, "Hold on, I've got to load you into the car." The real Dave, the Thick Dave, who had moved to Chicago, was replaced and confused with Thin Dave or Flat Dave. How often do we do that with God? How often do we create a reasonable facsimile, a flat God or a thin God, if you will, and all of a sudden the thin God, the flat God, has replaced the real God in our lives? The real God, who we are called to worship in spirit and truth, that's what Jesus told the Samaritan woman at the well, according to a story in the Gospel of John. The real God is replaced by something else. An idol, something we worship instead of God. It's easy to do. It's easy to put things that are actually considered good in first place and replace God in the forefront of our lives. It's easy to continue with this consumeristic mindset that we seem to have these days and make things all about ourselves instead of about God. That's really what these first four commandments are about. Put God first above all else. But know that you're worshiping him in spirit and truth, and not things that we would even consider good. We shouldn't worship the cross, our church, our pastor, the Bible, or any other number of good things that could represent God. We need to focus on God himself. The commandments are simple, but they're not easy. That's why we have grace. Close your eyes for a minute. Now, you're at home watching, so I know you're not. That's okay. Just pretend. Pretend that you're closing your eyes. Don't think of anything specific and concentrate on God. Worship him in spirit and truth. He's the creator of the entire universe, the God who is above all else, the God who loves you, and the God who offers you grace so that you have hope. Don't focus on an object that represents God, but focus on God himself. This ends this Lord's Day. We'll see you next week.